Resourceful Designer, episode 61, 12 Random Graphic Design Tips.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He bought the exact same wristwatch 3 times in a row. Mark DeCote.
Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in today. If this is your first time on the podcast, I just want to let you know that this episode is a little bit different. Normally, I talk about a specific thing about running your graphic design business, but today I decided to do a little bit different and just give you some random tips, some about running your business and some actually about designing, which is something I don't normally do. So if this is your first time, please keep in mind that this is not the way most of the podcasts go, so go back and listen to a few others to get a full feel for what Resourceful Designer is all about. I decided to change up the format a little bit this week because Monday in Ontario was a holiday, and it really threw my schedule out of whack this week. So I didn't have the time I normally like to put everything together before recording a podcast. And because I was running out of time, because I was a day short in my work week, I decided to just throw a dozen tips together and share them with you. So that's what I'm doing this week. And if I get a good response from it, maybe I'll do it again in the future. But one thing I'm not changing up is our resource of the week. And this week's resource is awards.com. And that's awards with 3 W's. So AWWWARDS.com. Now, awards.com is a website that I use sometimes for inspiration whenever I'm doing web design. The site states that it's a meeting point where digital design professionals from across the globe find inspiration, impart knowledge and experience, connect, and share constructive and respectful critiques. But it's a lot more than that. I use the site to see what the trends are, what's new and happening in web design, because they often, what I like to do is I go there and I visit their best of the month or best of the week or best of the year just to see what websites are out there. Now, a lot of them are so, how should I put this, out there or weird or innovative that it really isn't useful to me in what I'm doing. Some of the things that they're doing is quite incredible, but when you're designing a website for a local plumber, some of those features are just not really feasible for their websites. But it does help get your creative juices going and gives you inspiration on what is possible. And who knows, down the road, you might think of something that you could use one of those tricks or a design element or the way they put it together. So it's a great source of inspiration if you're designing websites. I highly suggest you check them out. Once again, that's awards.com, but it's awards with 3 W's. So AWWWARDS.com. And that's our resource of the week. And now, 12 random graphic design tips. Now, as I said earlier, these are going to be just completely random, all over the board, different tips that have helped me out over the years and that I think you might appreciate. Now, maybe after I go through all 12 of them, you'll say, well, Mark, I knew all of those. Or maybe you'll pick up some gems that you had never thought about before, which is kind of what I'm hoping for. But even if you are familiar with all of these tips, maybe it's enough just to remind you. Do you ever get that thing where you know something, but you don't think about it for a long time, and all of a sudden you get reminded and you go, oh yeah, I forgot all about that. It's something you knew, but it's just something you weren't implementing. So maybe if you already know all these tips, I might jog your memory a little bit there and get you thinking about them. So let's get started. Tip number 1, find the real deadline. Do you ever work on a project for a client and they say, well, we need a magazine ad or we need something done, and this is the deadline to submit it to wherever it has to go? Well, I've learned over the years that most of the time, the deadline that your client gives you that the ad has to be submitted or whatever has to be submitted is not the actual deadline. It's the deadline that the final destination, say, let's use a magazine for an example. It's the deadline the magazine gave the client to submit their ad, but it's not the actual deadline for the magazine. And what I mean by this is when the magazine set a deadline for their ads, they set these deadlines because a lot of the clients, what they'll do is they'll send them junk. stuff that the magazine has no choice but to play with and redesign. Or sometimes the client might not have a designer, so they just send a bunch of material to the magazine and the magazine has to put the ad together. Now, I'm not talking these big name magazines. They might have actual deadline. I'm talking local, like say you're doing a local visitor's guide, or there's some sort of special event coming up and there's a magazine being put out for it. That sort of magazine where local businesses might be advertising in it. And what I've found over the years is that my clients would give me a deadline, say, whatever, they need something in by March 15th is when they have to submit their ad by. But if I call the magazine directly and talk to them and say, listen, what's the deadline for this? They'll say, oh, Mark, because I've probably dealt with them, especially if they're local, they'll know me. They'll say, oh, Mark, well, the deadline, yeah, the 15th is the deadline we gave them, but if you're providing the ad, we only need it by the 30th. So a lot of times that can give you some extra time to work on things because now they know that the ad is coming from a professional graphic designer. They don't have to do anything to it. All they have to do is take the ad, plop it into their magazine, and they're done. So that extra time that they have from the deadline they gave their clients to submit all the information, they might have given themselves a week or two in order to work up the ads and get them proofed and approved by the client. Well, that is extra time that you have. So if it's something that's a month or so away, it might not be a big deal. But if a client comes up to you and says, oh, I completely forgot that I had this ad to submit to this magazine and it's due 2-3 days from now, are you able to do something? Well, give the magazine or the newspaper or wherever it is a call and say, is that the real deadline? Because, and make them sympathize with you. Say, hey, they just told me about it and they said it's due 2 days from now. Is that really when it's due, or can I submit it later? And more often than not, as I said, I've found over the years, the deadline that they gave their client is not the actual deadline. So that's my tip number one. Whenever you have a deadline, if it's something that is pressing, especially, as I said, if it's a deadline a month away, don't worry about it. Just work on the deadline your client gave you. But if it's something the client says that's only 2 or 3 days away, contact the final destination and say, is that the real deadline? Maybe it is, but there's always a good chance that it isn't. So that was tip number one, find the real deadline. Now, tip number two is how to get the proper file you need. Now, in last week's podcast, episode 60, my tip of the week was to do a Google search on a specific site for a file type PDF, and then you can download the PDF and extract whatever you need for that. Well, that's great, but what if the logo or whatever it is you need isn't available that way? You do a search on the company's website, and maybe it's not a big brand. Last week, I used the example of Pepsi Cola. Well, maybe it's not somebody as big as Pepsi. Maybe it's just a mom and pop shop and they have a website, and no, they don't have any PDFs or anything where you can extract this stuff from. So where do you get the proper file? Whenever you're talking to them and they don't have a clue, you say you need a good copy of the logo and they send you a GIF file, and you start asking them saying, I need a vector or an EPS, and they just don't have a clue what you're talking about. Well, there are a couple of other options you can do. One thing is, if they happen to be some sort of chain or an affiliate or something of a larger organization, call the head office. Either get permission from the client, say, I'm going to call head office directly, or just go above their head and do it. I've done this many, many times over the years where I would just simply call the head office for something and say, listen, this is what I'm doing. I'm working for your client here, and I'm either going to use what they gave me, which makes you look bad because the logo or whatever information was given was not good quality, or you can provide me with good stuff. And they almost always come through for you. Now, if you are calling a head office or something like that, ask to talk to somebody in marketing, and it goes a lot easier. And I've done this many times, especially when I'm doing something. Say somebody says, well, we need a copy of the Heart and Stroke Foundation or the Liver Foundation or some hospital or whatever. They need something to represent them on their poster, on their book, on whatever. I will often call the organization, whoever it is, like say the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada. I would call them up and say, hey, can I speak to somebody in your marketing? And then when I talk to the marketing, I'd say, listen, I'm designing this poster for such and such a person. The local Cornwall branch of the Heart and Stroke Foundation is sponsoring something. and they're not able to provide me a good logo. Can you provide me a logo? And chances are the head office can not only provide you with a good copy of the logo, they might be able to actually provide you with affiliate logos. So not only would I get, say in my case, the Hard and Stroke Foundation logo, I would get the Hard and Stroke Foundation for Cornwall logo, because sometimes each chapter will have their own logo. So you can get those by reaching out to head office. Very easy. Sometimes I don't even bother telling my clients that I'm doing it, and it just makes me look really good because I can provide some really good finished design to my client. Now, not only for logos, but I remember a couple of years ago, I was doing a job. It was a yearly job where I was doing a snowmobile map. And in our area, there's a lot of snow in the winter. Of course, I'm in Canada. And snowmobiling is a big thing. And I would provide a map of all the trails that snowmobiles would go on. And every year we would have to update it because the trails would change. Some trail that went through a farmer's yard one year, well, the farmer decided that, he doesn't want anybody going through his field the next year. So those trails would all change. Well, every year they wanted to update the look of the map. And I had to include photos of different snowmobiles, but specific photos. They didn't want to encourage wild, crazy driving. So no photos of snowmobiles flying through the air. Everything had to be on the ground and looks like just people were casually driving. Now, they weren't able to provide me with a lot of photos. So what I did is I contacted the different snowmobile manufacturers. I went out to Skidoo, Polaris, Yamaha, Articat. There was a few others. And I contacted them directly and said, listen, I'm working on this map. They want to include you guys because we were also on the map, including all the dealers. So anywhere you can buy or have a Skidoo repaired, a Yamaha, a Articat, all the different brands, where you can buy them and where you can have them serviced. So it was promoting their products. So I contacted each one of them, and all of them gave me access to their photo libraries, and I could just peruse their photos as I wished and pick the photos I wanted for the map. And they gave me full access. And the way I got that was to call each of their head offices. And it was something my client, I don't even know if I told my client I did it. It's just when he said we need new photos on there, and I took it upon myself to find the photos that I thought were best suited. And he looked at it and he would say, wow, every year, like, wow, those are great photos. Where'd you get them? Well, I went to the source for them. Now, one last thing about getting the files you need. Sometimes you can't do this. If there's no head office or affiliate office or something like that, say it's a mom and pop shop that, they've opened something downtown and they want you to design a website for them, or they want you to design whatever, posters, business cards and all that, and you need a good copy of their logo. Chances are they've had something done. If they have a brick and mortar business or a storefront, if they have a sign outside their store, chances are that sign was done with a vector image. So contact the sign company that did it. If they have a vehicle, if they have a van or a truck that has the logo on the side of the truck, contact whoever did that and ask them for a copy, a vector copy of the logo, because you know darn well that that's what they have. They're not going to create a sign or a vehicle wrap or decal from a JPEG or something. I mean, they could, but chances are it's going to be a vector file, or they might have gone through the trouble of vectorizing the logo themselves. And I know all the sign makers in the area, all the vehicle wrappers in the area, and we're on really good terms. And many, many times have I called them up and say, hey, I'm doing a job for so-and-so here, and you wrap their vehicle or you put the logo on their vehicle. Can I get a copy of their logo in vector format? I need it for a business card, for a flyer, or whatever. And rarely will they ever say no. In fact, I've only had one place say that they wouldn't do it. They had worked hard on getting it all ready. And all I ended up doing is saying, oh, well, that's too bad. Okay, well, I'll let the client know that I asked for it and you weren't able to provide it. Within 10 minutes, it was in my email box, because no, they're not dealing with me because I'm a client, but they also don't want what they've done or that they said no to get back to their client. And all of a sudden their client go, oh, these people didn't want to help me out. Why should I do business with them? So I've never had anybody refuse. I have had a few people say, yeah, no problem. We can do that. Can you have that company call and just tell us to send it to you just for protocol or whatever? And that's fine. Then I'll call up the company, and it doesn't matter if it's the secretary I talk to or the president or whoever. I just tell them, okay, can you call such and such sign company? They did they put the logo on your truck, or they did the sign out on the side of the road for you, and they have the proper logo I need. They need your permission to send it to me. and it gets it done so fast. So that's different ways that you can get logos or photos or files that you need, is just to contact the other people that may have them. Print shops as well. Although most of the time I would go to a sign company or a vehicle wrap company before I will go to the print shop asking them, just because I know the first two will have them in vector format. The print shop sometimes will not. They will try to have it in vector format, but sometimes it's just, if you're printing a business card, sometimes you can put a JPEG logo on there and it'll get away with it. So the printing company is usually my last resort. But those are different tips that I would use in order to get the proper file that you need, especially if the client doesn't have a clue what you're talking about. And we all know that happens. Now, tip number 3 is a way to get the client to give you an honest opinion on the design. And simply, it's design in black and white. Colors can always be added later. This is especially true for logos. I always design my logos in black and white. I provide them to the client in black and white because I don't want the color to skew their opinion. Now, I started doing this years ago when I was working at the print shop. Now, this is going back in the early 90s. And back then, there was no such thing as digital color. That came later. If you wanted something in color, chances are it was one color. If you wanted blue business card, they would be blue because we would put blue ink on the press and print the business cards. So if you wanted red or green, and you would print that. If you wanted two colors, say a blue and a red business card, then the price went up significantly. So a lot of people were opting for just one color cards. And when we were giving proofs, we had a copier that we can do color proofs to show the client kind of what it would be like. But the copier wasn't good enough to print off sets of business cards at that time. Later, we did get a copier that we could, but at that time, it was just good enough for proofs. And I remember a client came in, or actually, I designed the job, and they wanted 2 or 3 different designs. And this was for a business card. It wasn't actually a logo, it was a business card. And I designed one business card. I know I did it in green, one in blue, and one in a burgundy type color, because the client wasn't sure and they had asked for these different colors. And I gave them 3 different designs, each one in a different color. Now, I didn't actually go talk to the client. I was working. So one of the management up front, when the client came in to view the proofs, the management showed them the proofs and the client picked one, and they picked the blue proof, and it was approved. They signed off on it, and it came back to me and said, okay, can you output this one to the client, to the back? And anyways, long story short, the blue business cards got printed. And it just so happens I was available up front when the client walked in. So I saw the client and I said, oh, your job's ready. Here are your cards. And they looked at them and says, oh, these are great. It's really too bad though. And I says, well, what do you mean? And they says, well, I really like the design of the green card you did, but I preferred the blue color. So that's why I went with this one. And that's when it hit me for the very first time that the client liked the green design better, but didn't realize that they can have it in blue. And it's something that from our side of it, we think it's so simple. You just, especially when it came to printing, you just put whatever color ink on the press. It doesn't matter what. If you wanted blue, you put blue ink on the press. If you wanted green, you put green ink. But the client didn't realize that. And they ended up picking not the design they really liked, but their next choice, just because it was presented in a color they preferred. And that was the first time that my eyes got open to what color can do. And over the years, I've tried some other things where I know I have one client, I would provide something to her, and if there was any green on it, she would refuse it. She hated the color green. She hates, because I still do work for her. And now I know never to include green on any work I do for her. But the first few times, she didn't like something, and I found out that it wasn't that she didn't like the designs. She didn't like my color choices. I'd use green. So over the years, as I said, I've started designing all logos, specifically logos, in black and white so that the client can look at the design. If I give them 2, 3 different options, and I usually never give them more than 3 options, then they can pick and choose. And I'll tell them, I'll say, once you settle on the design you like, then we'll start adding color, and then we can play with color. And it's gone so much easier since then. So that's my third tip, is if you want an honest opinion of the design and what the client thinks, show it to them in black and white before. You can even have color designed and ready to show them, but show it to them in black and white first to get their opinion on the actual design before showing the colors, because sometimes the colors can make a big difference or make and break. And that's another point is sometimes they'll love the design and then they'll say, okay, let's color it. And you give them a color version and they'll know, ooh, I don't like this, but they know right away it's the color because they did like the design. You show them a red version and they say no. I just did some artwork for somebody recently and they asked me to do it in red. And when I showed it in red, they said, oof, I don't like that. Can we try making it blue? So it was an easy switch. I just switched it over to blue and all of a sudden they said, that's it. That is what I want. Even though they originally came to me asking for red. But again, the design was shown to them in black and white. And that's why I knew they liked the design. So tip number 3, to get an honest opinion, design in black and white. Tip number 4, stop explaining yourself. What I should say is stop explaining yourself over and over. Now, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, how whenever I create a WordPress website for a client and they're going to do their own content, create their own post and manage stuff, I don't just sit down and explain to them how to use WordPress if they're not familiar with it. I will record a short video or several short videos showing them step by step how to go about doing everything. And I do that with software on my Mac called ScreenFlow, which you can get by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/ScreenFlow. And that is an affiliate link. I do get a small commission if you do purchase it through that link, just to be upfront with you. But what I'll do is I'll record a short video and say, this is how you create a new blog post. This is where you go in and you put your title. This is where you type stuff. This is how you format the blog post. Here are the category sections where you pick your category. Here's where you can put in some tags if you want. Here's where you put in your featured image and so forth. And here's how you publish it. And by doing that, I only have to explain myself once. The client never has the option, or what I should say is the client never needs to contact me and say, Mark, how do you do that again? Mark, can you explain that again? Or worst case, Mark, the person that was handling it is gone. They left for another job. We've got so-and-so who's new here. Can you come in or can you take a few minutes to explain to them how to do it? I never have to deal with that again because the video is there and they can simply say to the new person, or if somebody forgot, they just watch the video again. And I have some generic, but it only takes a few minutes and I like personalizing them. So when I'm doing the video, I make sure it's their website. Cause I mean, making a blog post in WordPress is pretty simple. You can probably make one video and show it to all your clients because it's the same steps. But it's nice when you can personalize it and say, here, this is your website, and actually talk to the person. Say, hey, Bill, I know you're going to be doing this. Hi, Bill, this is what you have to do. And here's your website. And as I said, keep the videos short. I have a video on how to log into your WordPress. I have a video on how to create a blog post. I have videos on how to change if there's something that they need to change. I don't make one long video. I make a bunch of short videos. So it makes it easier for them in the future if they need to find something. And when I started doing this, I only started doing this a couple of years ago. I couldn't believe how much it saved me because it never fails. You present a website to a client and say, here's your website. Maybe you take some time to over Skype or email to explain yourself, or go into their office and sit down with somebody for a bit and show them how to use it. And then they don't touch it for a couple of weeks. And when finally they sit down, they have the time to look at it, they don't remember anything you taught them. So creating these videos has saved me a lot of time and headaches in teaching my clients what they need to know. So that's tip number 4. Stop explaining yourself over and over again. Use a video instead. Now, tip number 5, you should be familiar with this one, is use only one contact person on a project. Regardless of who you're working for, you should have one contact person. Now, the thing is a lot of times people say, yes, I have one contact person, but then they kind of let it branch off. And I've seen this happen over and over. And I am a stickler for this. I keep a strict chain of command. Whenever we meet, especially if I'm meeting with several people, or even if I'm meeting, say, with the president of a company, I ask the president, I say, who's my contact person? Am I dealing directly with you? Or are you going to have me talk to somebody else? And I let them know. Whoever is my contact person is the only person I will deal with. So if you want it to be you, then it's you, but then everything goes through you. And sometimes the president or CEO might not want to do that. They might want to delegate. But then I let them know that that means if you want something, you have to go through them as well. And you have to hold them to it. You have one contact person. I know recently there was a organization that I did a website for, and the president contacted me about a mistake. There was this big error on the website. They had forgot, some person had left, and they had all sorts of information with that person's contact info, and they had to get that off really quick. So the president contacted me and said, hey, can you take this off? This is really important. And I reminded the president, says, I'm ready. I can do it as soon as so-and-so gives me the go ahead. All information has to go through them. And it could have been something so simple. Yes. But you know what? The president actually, within minutes, I had the email from my contact person asking me to remove that information. And I went in and did it right away. But the president then contacted me afterwards and told me that they appreciated it, that I did stick to my guns. And because I had told them that I would not do anything for you. If you give me this contact person, that's who I'm dealing with. Now, yes, a contact person can change over the scope of a job, but keep it to one person and it'll make your life so much easier. Let them handle things, because the last thing you want to do, especially with a board of directors, is having 4 or 5 different people sending you information, especially if it's conflicting. I mean, I've had that before where somebody sent me something and say, oh, can you change the heading on such and such a page to read this? And then somebody else sends me an email saying, can you change the same heading to read this instead? Well, which one do you listen to? So you have one contact person, and that's the person you deal with. Now, tip number 6 is you set the meeting schedule. You know what? When it comes to meeting, first of all, your time is very valuable. So when it comes to meeting a client, whether it's on a phone call or in person or on Skype, that time is valuable. That's time you could be spent gaining new clients, working on client jobs, making money. But no, you're taking that time to talk with somebody, whether it's an existing client or a potential client, whatever it is, that time is precious. So my tip, and I've learned this over the years, is you set up the meeting. Never let your client dictate when the meeting is going to be. You got to remember that you are not working for your client. You were hired by them. You're not their employee. They shouldn't dictate things to you. And not to mention that when you start dictating it, it makes you sound more professional. So if a client calls me up and say, we need to talk about this thing, or they send me an email saying, can we set up a time to talk about this project? I will let them know, here are the times I have available. I have Tuesday at 2 p.m., Wednesday at 10 a.m., or Thursday at whatever, 4 p.m. And it doesn't matter if Wednesday is completely open and I can talk to them any time of the day. No, it doesn't matter. I tell them it's at 10 a.m. or whatever. That's the time I will talk to them. And what this does is a couple of things. First of all, when you say these are the times available, the client is much more inclined to keep the call or keep the meeting. If they dictate it, like say you tell the client, let's set up a meeting, when's good for you? And the client will say, well, why don't we meet on Thursday at 3? Well, you know what? Thursday at 1, you might get an email and the client will say, oh, you know what? Something came up. I'm going to have to reschedule that. And okay, well, there, it just threw your afternoon because you were prepared for this meeting. It just threw your schedule out of whack. But if you set up the meeting and tell the client, listen, I'm available Thursday at 2 to meet, the client is going to be less inclined to want to change that. And if something else does come up, chances are they're going to want to change the other thing and keep the meeting with you, unless it's an emergency, in which case they may still cancel. But they are a lot less inclined to cancel if you were the one to set up the time. Now, if you tell them, yeah, let's set up a meeting, I have this time available, this time available, and this time available, it makes you sound very important. Like, whoa, Mark is really busy. He only has these certain times to talk to me. I'm going to take advantage of those times when I can. So let's set up a meeting at this time. And if something comes up, again, they're going to be less inclined because say I told them I had a time available on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and they set up the Thursday and something comes up. They don't know when my next available time is. And if they really want to discuss this, they're going to make arrangements in their schedule to accommodate me. And I find since I started implementing this, where I am the one that schedules everything, or not schedules, but I'm the one that tells them what times are available and when they could meet, I have had very few clients cancel a meeting on me. Whereas years ago, when I used to tell the client, well, I'm available Thursday afternoon or Wednesday morning, whatever time you let me know. And then they would let me know, sure, 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. As I said, a good portion, maybe not half, but I'd say 30-40% of the time, the client would end up canceling the meeting. Since I started dictating, very, very few meetings have been canceled. So that's another tip. It doesn't matter if your schedule is wide open, give them a specific time, and that's when you're available. Now, tip number 7, again, when meeting with clients, is if you want to get your foot in the door with a new client, pay for their meal. If you're meeting in person, I mean, of course, if you're on Skype or phone or email, you can't do this. But if you're meeting with somebody in person, first of all, I love meeting at coffee shops or at restaurants because it's more intimate. You can sit down, you can talk with the client. Make sure you pay for the client. Sometimes the client will want to pay you, like they're coming in and they want to pay for you. Keep in mind that whoever pays has the hands up, the head up on the other one. So if you pay for them, even if it's just a coffee, and what I normally do is I like to get there before the meeting is scheduled, especially if I don't know who the client is. And I'll try to get a table or what near the door, and I'll sit down and I'll open up my case and make it look like I'm waiting for somebody. But I don't actually go and get my drink or my coffee or well, I don't drink coffee. I drink hot chocolate in those cases, but that's just me. I don't go get anything. I wait for the client to show up. And when the client shows up and I finally meet him, then I tell him, I just sat down. I'm going to go up. What do you want? I'm getting something. And they might say, no, it's my treat. And I says, no. I arranged this meeting because, again, I'm the one that set up the meeting, like I just said. So I said, I set up this meeting. It's my treat. Do you want something to eat? Do you want something to drink? And what this does is now they feel like they have to, first of all, listen to you all out. Say it's a potential client. They're not sure about you. Well, by buying them this, they feel more open to listen to what you have to say. And in a way, they also might feel a little bit in debt. They might feel like they owe you a little bit. So maybe they're going to throw the job or they'll be more inclined to throw the job your way. Not to mention, it really makes a good impression. If you say, hey, no, don't worry about it. It's on me and that. And then you talk and whether the project is something big or small, it doesn't matter. If you offer to pay for their meal, it gives you that little step up that maybe your competition didn't do. Like what if they had a meeting with the competition and when they got there, they offered to pay for the competition's meal or coffee or whatever. And then it comes down to the two choices and they're not sure which one. Well, you know what? That guy there bought me a meal. Maybe that's all the difference you need in order to get that job. So it's just that one extra foot in the door with a new client is pay for their coffee or a donut or a Danish, or if it's a meal, pay for their meal. After all, you can write it off. It is a tax write-off. Now, tip number 8 is just a quick one I want to cover. And that is, have you ever run into a problem? This, especially whenever I'm working on websites, say in WordPress or something, and somebody sends me their copy, and especially most of the time it would be sent in a Word document. And you copy from Word into WordPress, and it can do some really funky things in WordPress with the formatting. And especially if you look at the source code, you're getting all this extra little code in there that you weren't expecting. So one little tip or trick that I do is I always keep my mail program open because when mail comes in and stuff like that. But when I'm doing a lot of copying back and forth, I will open up a blank email, set it to plain text. You can usually, in whatever program you're doing, you can have rich text format or plain text. I will set it to plain text. And then what I will do is I will copy the information from Word, switch over to my email, paste it. And by pasting it, it automatically becomes plain text. So all formatting is removed. Then I immediately Command A to select it all, Command C to copy it, then switch over to WordPress or wherever, and I can paste it there and then format it the way I want. It's just a quick way to get rid of the formatting that's already there. Now, in some programs, you do have a paste without formatting. In some, it's like on a Mac, I know it's Command Option Shift V. In some programs will allow you to paste something with and forget the formatting. But I have found that even with that, every once in a while, there's something that comes through that was unwanted. So my go-to, and I find it really quick, especially once you get used to it. I'll be in Word and I'll select whatever paragraph or something. I'll hit Command C, then I hit the Command Tab, which on the Mac allows you to switch between your different open applications. I'll hit Command Tab to go to my email program. The email is already open, so then I just hit Command V for paste. As soon as it's pasted, the formatting is already gone, so then I immediately hit Command A, Command C, Command Tab again to switch over to, say, WordPress or whatever. And then I can click and Command V again. And yes, it's a lot of little click, 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 click. But once you get used to it, it's so easy. And I find it's the quickest way to remove formatting. Yes, you can go in and highlight stuff and say like unformat or make it all plain. But I find that even when doing that, every once in a while, there's a character or some sort of little bit of code that even though you tell it to remove, it's still there. But by going into the email program and making it plain text, when you paste it into the final destination, all that stuff is removed. So that's my little trick. I've been doing that for years. And as I said, it takes me no time. It's just a matter of Command C, or if you really want to start off, Command A, Command C, Command Tab to switch over, Command V, Command A, Command C, Command Tab, Command V, and I'm done. And it sounds like a lot, but once you start doing it, it's really nothing. Now, tip number 9 is mostly when you're doing print design. This doesn't really apply to web design. But when you're working on stuff in, say, Quark Express, or I know Quark Express, well, what are you, an old timer? Yes, I am an old timer. I love my Quark Express. I've been using it since the late 80s, early 90s. But you can do the exact same thing in InDesign. And what I'm talking about is the often neglected find and replace feature. Now, let me tell you a story. When I was working at the print company, I used to do a lot of books. A lot of people would come in and they wanted to self-publish their novel, their memoirs, their whatever. So I became the go-to person for books because I could format a book super fast. Like I remember one job the client came in and it was a 300-page, I think it was a memoir that they had. It was 300 pages. And we looked through and we started figuring out the formatting, and there was going to be some quotes, some highlighted or not highlighted, italicized quotes. There was going to be some subheads and a bunch of stuff. So just trying to give an idea to the client, we said, why don't we say a minute per page for all 300 pages just to go through and format. Some stuff would be a little bit longer, some stuff a little bit less, but let's average it out to a minute per page, which was probably a little bit of padding involved there because we were trying to make sure we were covering our butts in case something happened. And the client finally agreed. So that was 300 minutes, which is about 5 hours of work, or it is 5 hours of work. And the client agreed to that, agreed to our price. And then the job was given to me and I formatted the entire book in 20 minutes. Now, how did I format that book in 20 minutes, a 300-page book? Using find and replace. Find and replace is a lot more than just, hey, I need to find the word Bill and change it to William. You can do so many things with find and replace, especially in programs. A lot of programs no, but in programs like Quark Express or InDesign that allows you to have so many search options. It allows you to find all sorts of different things and change them. So an example, say I had this book to format, 300-page book, and who knows, 50 chapters. Well, the first thing I would do is, I wouldn't actually lay it out. This is just the way I like to work, but I would have my page layout for where the book is going to be, and I'll have whatever, if I need a footer with the page numbers and maybe a header with the title of the book on one page and the author's name on the other page. I'd set my headers and footers up. And then I would have all my page with continuing linked pages so that all the text would flow from one page to the next. But in order to format the book, I would actually open a separate document and just have a regular 8.5, 11 page linking pages and paste the entire book in there. Then I would go through and I would create the style sheets I want. And I would say, okay, say they have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Well, those chapter heads I would want them whatever, a certain font, a certain point size, bold. Maybe I want them 2/3 of the way or 1/3 of the way down the page and so forth, whatever. I would set up my formatting for that. Then I would set up my formatting for the body copy. Maybe the first paragraph of every chapter has a drop cap. I would set up that style sheet. So I'm setting up all my style sheets beforehand. Then I take the blank document, and the first thing I do is I select the entire document and I make it my body copy. And some people will say, well, doesn't all this formatting come in from Word or wherever? Yes. And sometimes I will leave that in, but I often find that the easiest thing to do is to remove all the formatting and apply whatever I've set up for my body. So what my normal paragraph style would be, I would use it for the entire book. Then I would start using find and replace. And I would say find anytime that the word chapter. Now you might have to go in afterwards and fiddle with it a little bit. But let's say every time the word chapter appears, then I want to replace that. And you don't replace the word chapter. I want to replace the style sheet that is being used. So now it's my body style, but I'm going to replace it and I'm going to put the chapter style sheet. And then I say find all instances, boom. All 50 chapters, the word chapter 1, chapter 2, all the way through chapter 50 have now been formatted the way I want. Now you can start doing stuff like, I want the first paragraph after every chapter 1, chapter 2, the first paragraph needs a drop cap. Well, okay. Now I'm going to do a search for anytime there's a carriage return that is stylized with the chapter style. There's 50 of them. And I would say every time that carriage return, I'm going to find that carriage return and I'm going to replace it with a carriage return. Then I'll throw in some random symbol, like say like the equal sign. I'll say I'll replace that one carriage return that's styled with chapter with a carriage return, 2 equal symbols, and another carriage return. And I go through the entire book and I do that. So now everywhere that it says chapter 1, chapter 2 is followed by a carriage return, 2 equal signs, another carriage return, and then my first paragraph. Now what I can do is I can say, okay, now I'm going to do a find and replace, and I'm going to find the 2 equal signs plus a carriage return plus a wildcard character. So equal carriage return plus whatever character comes next. And what I do now is I say, I want to find any instance of that, and I want to change that to the style sheet that has a drop cap. And when I apply that, every time that it sees that, and now it's looking again, carriage return, equal carriage return that are formatted in the chapter style sheet, it'll find those and it'll replace them, or sorry, not replace them. It will reformat them to the style sheet with a drop cap. And then all of a sudden, the first paragraph after every chapter word now has a drop cap. Then I could go in and do a find and replace and say, okay, I want to find everywhere that has a equal, and a carriage return and just delete them and do that. So now it's only taken me probably less than 60 seconds. And I have every chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 in the book has now been formatted to the way I want. And every first paragraph afterwards has a drop cap on it. And I just go through that and through that. A lot of it is finding something and replacing it with something else that's temporary, and then replacing that temporary thing with the final thing, and so forth. And when you get creative, you can do a lot of stuff really fast. You can also create temporary style sheets that don't actually do anything. You can create a style sheet, say called temporary, and don't assign any styles to it. But when you find something like say there was some quotes and whoever they listed after the quote who quoted, and they put a hyphen and then the person's name. Well, you can say, okay, find everywhere where there's a hyphen, like a blank space or a carriage return, then a hyphen, then a space, and then the person's name. And I'm going to want to change all those hyphens to M dashes. Well, it's hard to find all those things and change just those hyphens to M dashes. So what you do is you apply them, or you apply a temporary style to them. And because there's no actual styles nothing changes, it doesn't affect your copy. And then you can go in and say, anytime I find a hyphen that's styled temporary, I want to change it to say an M dash or something like that. So anyways, all of this to say, and I probably confused a lot of you if you're not used to working in InDesign or Quark or page layout program, and you're not really familiar with the find and replace. But I just want to tell you how powerful that tool is and how quickly you can format things. And that's how, when I was at the print shop, I became the go-to person, because I can take a book that other designers, for years, they had been doing books. And these people have been taking hours and hours because they were going through page by page and changing the formatting and adjusting things. And I was able to do it in practically no time. As I said, a client paid us for 5 hours of work and I formatted the book in 20 minutes. And since then, I've used that over and over. Just this past week, I did a project where I had to do some fancy find and replace, and it saves you so much time. So if you do page layout, especially if you're doing books, if you're just doing a flyer or a business card, of course, you're not going to need this. But if you're doing any sort of books or booklets or all that, learn the find and replace feature. It'll save you a ton of time. Now, tip number 10 is when it comes to websites and especially domain names, I always like to tell my client to cover all their bases. So say a client comes to you and they want to start a new business and a new website, and they either are going to register a domain, or if you do it, like in my case, I offer domain registrant. So I will register a domain for a client. I will often tell them to look for multiple variations of their domain. In some cases, like say the company is Fitzgerald and Associates. Well, I will get them to register the domain Fitzgerald and Associates, Fitzgerald Associates. I will get them to register the .com, the .net, in my case, the .ca because we're in Canada, and so forth. If it's company like the Fitzgerald Group, well, register it with the, register it without the. So you'll have the Fitzgerald Group, and you'll also have Fitzgerald Group. And again, register the .com, the .ca, the .net, whatever. Now, what this does is, first of all, it covers all the bases for the clients, and it's a good idea. And if you are selling domains, you can make a couple of extra pennies off of it. I mean, you don't make a lot of money on domains, maybe $1 if you're lucky, or $2 per domain. But just that little feature of reminding your clients or selling your clients on these multiple variations of their domain will inform your client that you are thinking of them. It's something that, yes, other people will mention it, but if you tell them, listen, you're covering yourself, because there's nothing stopping some other company in the US, or say they're in Canada. In Canada, it's very popular to use the .ca domain. You know, we're proud Canadians, and we like to show that we use .ca. I myself, on my personal company, I have the .ca domain. I do own the .com. So whenever it comes with a client, I always ask them to register these things, because say in Canada, if it's the Fitzgerald Group .ca and they're proud Canadians, well, what if somebody in the US starts a company, or in the UK starts a company, the Fitzgerald Group, and they register the .com? So I always tell them to register as many as they can. And sometimes for smaller clients, it can get expensive. I've had clients where I've said, here's a dozen different variations and you should register all of them. And they start looking, well, that gets kind of expensive. No, you know, and maybe year after year, I've had clients where year after year, they start saying, well, you know, we have a dozen registered. Well, maybe these 2 or 3 we don't need. And next thing you know, they're down to only 2 or 3. And that's their client prerogative. But what happens is, by explaining this to your client, it's not a way of getting them to spend more money. And it's not a way for you to make the little bit you might make off a domain name. But it is a way to tell the client that, hey, listen, I'm thinking more about you as a whole. I'm trying to protect you more than just build your website and make some money off you. And your clients will really appreciate that. So that's one little tip. If you are doing this, hopefully you're already doing this, but it's just something, let them know, especially with these newer fancy domain names that are out now, where you can get all sorts of stuff. Like I actually have a .design domain name. In fact, I have 2 of them. Resourceful Designer actually has one. If you go to resourceful.design, it should redirect you to resourcefuldesigner.com. So some people think, oh, these fancy new domains are great, but still convince them to buy the .com and that. Like I just got that out of a novelty, resourceful.design, but I'm not really using it. I'm using resourcefuldesigner.com. So try to convince them to purchase the additional ones. I mean, they don't have to go overboard. You don't have to get all the .net, the .co, the .info, and all of them, but at least the main ones. Get the .com, and if you are doing something like maybe you're a .ca or maybe you're a .uk, well, get them to register the .com and tell them to pick one to use as their main one. A lot of clients don't realize that you can redirect a domain. So when I tell them, you can get the .ca and the .com, and then you just pick which one you want to use, and we'll redirect the other one to it. They'll go, oh, I didn't know you can do that. Most people don't realize you can do that. So that's something, just cover all their bases. Now, tip number 11 is kind of along the same ways. And this is one I actually stumbled upon a few years ago, and I've actually used this for clients, is steal competitors' domains. And what I'm talking about is, say you find a company like this would help. You're doing a project for a client, a web project, and you're doing the discovery stage where you're trying to figure out stuff about the client, what they're going to do. And in that discovery, you also look at the competition. Well, say you look at the competition. And in my case, I'll give you an example. There was a company that I was doing some work for, working on their website. And during the discovery phase, I went and looked at all their local competition. And I found this other competitor that was working with the .ca domain. And just for the fun of it, I looked it up. And that competitor never registered the .com domain. The .com was actually available. So I told my client, why don't we register the .com domain and just redirect it to your website? So now if anybody goes to the competitor's website and types in .com instead of .ca, it gets redirected to my client's website instead, who's in the same niche. So the person might realize, oh, I'm in the wrong place, or they might not realize. They might go, oh, well, okay, this is the information I want. It's not the website I thought it was, but it has the information. So that's one thing to do. Now, I've actually done this myself. I have some of my quote unquote competitors, and they might not even know I've done this, but I've registered some of my competitors' domains because they didn't have the .ca, or vice versa, they don't have the .com. So I would register them myself and just redirect them to my website. Now, a funny side story there is that client that I told you about, the first one I did this to, years later, that competitor that we kind of quote unquote hijacked their the .com version of their domain, that competitor became a client of mine. And when I sat down to talk to them about their website, they came up and they were not, well, I guess they were a little bit angry. They never found out anything, but they just said, can you believe that our competitor actually owns this domain? Because when I innocently asked them if there was any other domains, I knew that they didn't have the .com, but I always ask the client, do you own any other domain names in case there's something else that I have to deal with or another redirection or anything? And that's when the conversation came up. It's like, no, we don't, we found out that the .com version is actually owned by our competitors. And I mean, I never let them know that I'm the one that suggested it and that I'm the one that registered it for them. But anyways, that's just a fun side story. Gee, I hope these clients don't listen to my podcast. But anyways, so that's my tip number 11 is if you have a competitor, whether it's your direct competitor or for your clients, when you're doing the discovery and you're looking at who their competition is, look to see if there's a domain name that's available. I know that example that I'm telling you, my first client gets about 5,000 hits a year, give or take, from the .com version of his competitor's website. So that's 5,000 people that come to his website when they were typing in his competitor's website. Now, whether that converts to anything, I don't know, but he's happy that at least those people that are going there are at least being exposed to his name, his brand, and so forth. And there's nothing stopping you from registering them. And in the long run, if worse comes to worse, you can always sell the domain if you need to. Now, my last tip number 12, is when you're ordering stuff, order extra for yourself. I mean, I do this all the time. I've mentioned before on the podcast that I do a wide range of print brokering, including stuff like t-shirts and ball caps and sometimes I'll do pens and that. Like, I don't do them myself. I farm them out to different places. But there's nothing stopping you from ordering some extras, some blanks. Like whenever I order t-shirts for a client, like I just did a volleyball club where I designed a logo. It wasn't their volleyball logo, but they wanted a special t-shirt designed for their warm-up. And I designed the t-shirt, and I forget how many t-shirts they ordered, and they order them in different sizes for everybody. When I place the order for the t-shirts, because I don't order them all from one place, what I do is I have the t-shirts ordered. I have a company that supplies t-shirts. I have them shipped to the screen printer, and then the screen printer prints them and then ships them to me and so forth. So say the client orders 100 t-shirts. Well, when I order the t-shirts themselves, I'll order 101 or 102, and I'll get the extra ones in my size. And then when I ship them to the screen printer, I just tell the screen printer, print 100 t-shirts. Those two that are the extra large, or hopefully large, I'm trying to lose weight, but I'll tell the screen printer, put two aside, don't print them, and just include them in the box when it gets shipped to me. And I end up getting these extra t-shirts, which I don't pay for shipping or anything like that, as part of the order. And it's not like I'm making a profit on the t-shirts that my client's ordering. So it's not like I'm actually paying for them. The client is technically paying for these extra t-shirts. The same thing goes for other stuff. If you have a client that's printing off notepads for some reason, you can always tell the printer, hey, while you're putting these notepads together, can you throw a couple of extra in there with blank pages, not the printed pages? And I'll pay for the paper if need be and get some extra notepads for yourself. Perfect bound books is a great one. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a client that was doing this perfect bound. It was a history of, actually, I believe, that client, it was the history of cheese making in the area. And I formatted that book, and I formatted it in record time by using the find and replace feature that I mentioned earlier. But he ordered, I forget how many it was, like 300 books or something. And they were hardcover bound. And the company that was doing the binding, I told them, I says, once you got it on the machine and you're doing this, can you bind 2 extra or 3 extra books with just blank pages in it? And the machine's already set up. They just put the paper in. And I might have had to pay I think it was like $3 or $4 each. But I got these 3 really nice hardbound books that are completely blank inside that I can use as notebooks. I actually gave one. It was really nice paper inside. So I gave one to somebody I knew who was an artist, and he used it as a sketch pad. But it's just something I order extra. Same thing if you do any print brokering and you do some online ordering or that sort of stuff, what you can do is create your own marketing material. And when you're placing your order for your client, include stuff to send to the printer so that you can save on shipping costs. I do that all the time. Whenever I have, like, say I want to do a postcard or a business card or something like that. Like when I made business cards, I went to a conference and I had business cards for Resourceful Designer. Well, I had designed the business cards a long time ago, or a long time beforehand. And I waited till I had a business card order for a client. And when I sent that order off for the client, I included my artwork. And sometimes in these printing places, say client wants 500 business cards and maybe I want 500. Some places you can order 2 orders of 500 business cards and you just combine the shipping costs. But some places what you do is instead of ordering 2 orders of 500, you order an order of 1,000 business cards, but tell them there's 2 different designs. And it's actually cheaper that way than ordering 2 separate 500s. So whenever I wanted my own marketing material printed, I always just wait till I have a client ordering something similar or placing an order, and I send it along in order to save on shipping costs. So that's kind of my tip number 12 is just order extras for yourself or piggyback on your client's orders in order to save you some money. So as I said, I had 12 completely random tips. I don't know if you got anything out of them, but it was just fun to think up these things and talk a little bit about them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 61 and let me know what you thought of these tips, or if you have any other tips that you might want to share that you think the Resourceful Designer community might be interested in. And now our question of the week. And this week's question comes in from Crystal. She says, how do you schedule clients who are in different time zones? I have clients all over the United States and Canada, and none of them are in the same time zone as me. I find myself working late just to accommodate my clients who are 4 or 5 hours behind me. Is there a functional way that I can schedule my clients so I don't have to work until midnight? Well, thanks for your question, Crystal. And this all goes back to my tip number 6. And when I said you should be in charge of scheduling, that's exactly what this works down to. Now, I happen to know Crystal because in this email, she mentioned that she's from Canada. She's on the East Coast. So she has a lot of time zones to cover if she wants to talk to somebody on the Pacific Coast. But what it all comes down to is you setting the standard. If you want to talk to a client, if you don't want to be working till midnight or something like that to deal with a client, you tell the client, these are the times I have available. And if it means the client has to set their meeting for 8 o'clock a.m., 9 a.m. at their time, then so be it. The thing is you got to remember, Crystal, you are not working for your client. You are not an employee. You are not trying to accommodate them. You are running a business, and you should expect them to adhere to your business rules just as much as you are to them. I mean, think about it like any other industry or business. If you were going to call somebody and say you had to call them because you needed a service call, a customer service thing, and they had certain business hours, you would have no choice but to contact them during those hours. You can't say, well, I'm in a different time zone, so I'm at this time. I want to reach you at such and such a time. No, they're available between this time and this time, whatever time zone they're in. Well, you can do the exact same thing. If your client wants to deal with somebody who's working on the East Coast and in your time zone, then you simply say, well, these are the times I have available, and maybe work in their time zones and say, like, I'm available up till 10 a.m. your time or till noon. So make sure that all your scheduled calls or meetings are all done in the morning for their time. And as I said, you are not working for them. You're working with them. They need to accommodate you. Now, if you start doing this, like where you're calling them at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night to accommodate them, they're just going to come to expect it, and you're never going to be able to get out of that rut. So you got to set it right down right at the start and say, listen, these are the times I work. Now, whether you work yourself outside of that, like I tell my clients, I work 9 to 5. Those are my business hours, 9 to 5 Eastern time. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not sitting at my computer at 8 o'clock at night doing something. It's just my client doesn't need to know that I'm doing that. And if my client wants to contact me for anything, it has to be between 9 to 5 Eastern time. And I have clients that are on in California. I have clients that are in British Columbia as well. And they're 3 hours before me. Just like I have clients that are across the world in Australia that are almost 12, or I think the last client, I think he was 11 hours difference, or I don't remember. And he's ahead of me. Well, it doesn't matter. I work between 9 to 5. So if you want to talk to me, you have to talk to me within those time periods. Now, sometimes in those cases, I might make an exception. Like I know that I have one client that I deal with that I will go as far as 7 p.m. to schedule a meeting. I won't schedule after that because we start at 7 and maybe a meeting will last 30 minutes and that. But I know that at that time, I think 7 p.m. my time is like 9 a.m. his time the following day. So in those cases, I'll make an exception. Now, I also have to keep in mind that because it's the following day, I never schedule a meeting on a Friday with him because I know it would be 9 a.m. Saturday, just like he never schedules a meeting on Monday at his time because he knows that would actually be Sunday here. So little things you have to take into consideration. But it's your business. You dictate when your clients meet, when you should talk to them, and it's up to them to accommodate you. Just like I said in my tip, you set the times. You say, we need a meeting. Here are the times I have available. You pick one. And if they say none of those work, then you come back with some other times. Don't let your client dictate the meeting and tell you when they're available. You let them know. Because again, it makes you sound more important. If you say, I have this, and this time available, then they're wondering, well, what are you doing all this other time? Wow, you must be really busy. You must be important. I should make this meeting and schedule it because I really want to work with you. If you're that important and that busy that you only have these times available to talk to me. It's all subliminal and it's all this psychic warfare almost, you can say, but it does help. So Crystal, I don't know if that helps, but all I would say is you schedule the meetings. If your clients are 4 or 5 hours behind you, then tell them that the meetings have to be scheduled in the morning on their time to accommodate you. There's no reason for you to be working that late. If they want to set up a meeting at 5 p.m. their time so that it has to be 10 p.m. your time, just simply say no. They'll accommodate unless you keep giving in, and then they'll take advantage of you, and that you don't want to get into that rut. So thank you for the question, Crystal. Now, if you have a question for the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and fill out the form and submit your question, and I'll try to use it on a future episode of the podcast. Now, before I go, I want to share a beautiful 5-star review I received in iTunes by Eric Stone from the USA. And Eric wrote, I did a search for a graphic design podcast a while back, and I landed on this one and another one that is focused mostly on the graphic design part of business. When I listened to the first episode I landed on, Mark stated that he would only be discussing the business side, and I thought, oh no, this is going to be bad. But I kept listening, and it made so much sense. It was perfect timing because I had decided to get serious with my work, and I decided to start an LLC and really get into it. I can say that for me personally, having Mark explain business topics for graphic design is more valuable than any other resource. The business side is what holds designers back. It is in fact a business that I'm trying to run. And these tips that I will continue to learn from Mark really do relieve the stress of trying to freeball that aspect of my love for graphic design. The relief of having a go-to guide for billing and plans for staying away from certain clients really frees up my brain to produce better graphics. An episode the other day about how a graphic designer might be losing business by talking over the customer's head was an epiphany for me. It has changed everything. I was so guilty of using terms and not explaining them, and I never once realized it. I look forward to listening to more great information contained in this podcast. Thank you so much, Mark. Eric. Well, thank you for that kind review, Eric. I really, really appreciate it. Now, I do have some others, and I'll read them in future episodes of the podcast. But if you would like to leave me a review, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, which will redirect you to the page where you can leave a review for me. And I do appreciate each and every one I receive. Now, once again, the resource of the week this week was awards.com, and that's awards with 3 W's. A great site for simple inspiration when it comes to web design. So check them out. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Once again, if you have any comments on the tips, or if you have some other tips you would like to share, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 61. Until next time, I wish you all the best with your graphic design business. This is Mark DeCote, as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.